workshops, and then I've been mentoring them to find jobs, craft their portfolios and stuff like that. And I've also been on the both sides of the table when it comes to recruitment. So I've applied to positions using these tactics, and I've hired people who have either been doing this or not. You can find me online at amatti.org, where I write the blog about technology, life, building apps, building websites, all sorts of things like that. And then you can find me on Mastodon if you like to do the about stuff. But what's going to happen today, and what we're going to talk about today? So first of all, we're going to talk about projects, portfolio. I'm not going to tell you how to do it, how to write code. That's what you're here to learn. But I'm going to talk to you about what to do and how to get best out of them. We're going to talk a lot about storytelling. I've learned over the past years, past decade, that storytelling is one of the most important skills in today's modern work life. Whether it's applying to stuff, inspiring others, selling your ideas, or just communicating, storytelling is a really important thing. And then we're gonna briefly at the end talk about job applications, job interviews, but most of the time we're gonna spend on the projects and storytelling side. And this talk is aimed for two different audiences. The first one is mostly you, so people who are early in their career, looking maybe for the first job or the second job. But it's also for those who have been in the industry and who want to stand out against everybody else's applications and everybody else's projects and portfolios. I don't actually know how much stuff we have or how much time, but when Salla invited me, she gave me a 2-hour window. I'm not gonna monologue for 2 hours. This talk will probably be about half an hour to 45 minutes, depending on how much we have discussion. Because I do encourage you to ask questions during the talk. So if there's something that you're interested in learning more, something that you want to be clarified, just raise your hand and we're gonna be drawing the catch box. And I want this to be a really kind of casual, relaxed, chill session. And then once the talk is over, I'm gonna hang out. So if anybody wants to stay and kind of have a discussion, let's do that. I have plenty of time today to talk with all of you. So before I start, there's this really important disclaimer, because I absolutely hate giving advice on like job applications and job interviews and all of that, and yet I end up doing it. But the thing is that for every advice I give, or every advice that somebody else, anybody gives, there's somebody who thinks the exact opposite. You can read so much advice on like how to write your resume. Should it be 1 page, 2 page, 3 page? Should it have a picture or not? Should you list your hobbies or not? Should you have your address or not? And it's like, there's no real truth. There are many individual truths. And I think that the only one qualified to give you advice about that particular job application or an interview is the person who's going to interview you and make the decision. There are no general truths, but I have some ideas that I'm going to share, and then you can pick the things that you feel are good. Another disclaimer is that this kind of approach of building hobby projects and building portfolios, it's not the only way to get the job in this industry. You don't have to do any of this if it's not something you like. Most of the developers in the industry have brilliant careers, and they've never built a hobby project. They've never written a blog post. 0.001% of developers. But the reason I'm talking about this is something I know about. This is something I'm good at. And I don't have a lived experience of that other path. So, if you're interested in that, you need to find somebody else to tell you about how to get the job without all of this. But alright. So I've sectioned this into 3 different parts. We're gonna talk about building stuff, showcasing stuff, and talking about stuff. And in the build section, we're gonna talk about the projects. What kind of projects to build, how to come up with ideas. Then on the show side, we're gonna talk about how do you make that code that you wrote, the app that you built, something that somebody else is actually want to take a look at, can understand, and can get something out of it when you send your GitHub portfolio, for example, to somebody. And at the end, we're gonna talk about how do you use those projects and your portfolio when you're applying for jobs. How do you talk about your projects? How do you bring them up? And how do you do storytelling in a way that will get somebody excited about interviewing you? So let's start from the beginning. I've been a student myself, and I've been talking to a lot of students in the past decade. And one of the most difficult things to figure out at the beginning is, what should I build? I don't have any ideas. That's partially because you might be still so early in your technical career that you don't know what's possible with your skill set. And you haven't experimented with a lot of stuff. So the kind of potential space of what to do is limited. And I want to give you a couple of pointers with some real-life examples on where can you come up with ideas if you don't have any ideas. And then at some point, you're gonna realize that you start to have more and more ideas based on the stuff that you've built. And the first important thing is that your projects, your hobby projects, your portfolio stuff, it doesn't have to be kind of economically impressive or something that would have millions of users or even more than one user, to be honest. It doesn't have to be technologically super advanced. It needs to be at the level that you can write code. And it can be simple if it does a job. So don't waste all the time thinking that I don't have any good ideas that would be a good product. Write small projects that, as we're gonna learn soon, that help you or somebody else. It doesn't need even users. Usually it's good to have one user, yourself. And then everything else is bonus. Because the job of these projects is not to kind of attract a lot of attention. It's something that you can show to somebody individually and be like, hey, this is what I can do. This is what I've built. Take a look at it. So option number 1 for coming up with ideas is build something that you need or use every single day. And I think this is the best case scenario, but it's also the most difficult one. Because if you don't have ideas, you don't have ideas. The reason I think these are some of the best projects is that they become inherently useful to you. It is stuff that you end up using every day. So you have more motivation to improve it. You have more motivation to keep working on it compared to some kind of artificially figured out, I'll just build a inventory system for an imaginary grocery store. It's really difficult to motivate yourself to do that kind of project because you'll never use it. You might start and work on it for a Saturday, and then life happens and nothing happens on the project. And it's really good for you because you discover the features, the bugs, while you're using it. So you don't need to come up with stuff. The ideas will surface on their own when you're using here and there. I started adding these command line flags to do more and more stuff. And I have never given a crap of idea of like, does anybody else use this? It's been downloaded a couple of thousand times, but the real value is that I use it every single day. It's really small, it does one thing, but it does it well. It basically just reads an API and it prints text on different colors. And that's it. But it's a really good project for a portfolio because it's small, it's well contained, it's designed to be simple. So it's also kind of easy to read the code. If somebody wants to check out how this was built, it's not the best Rust code in the world. I'm a beginner, but it's the best that I can write at this point. So build something that you need, or something that could be helpful to you every day, every week, every month. Something like that. The second option is to build something for a community or organization that you're part of. It's a great way to contribute, for example, to a non-profit. It could be your hobby club. It could be the student community here at Hive. It could be your family. It could be your WhatsApp group that plays games on WhatsApp and you want to make it easier to set those up. Whatever it is, build something for the people that you interact with. And it's great because in non-profits, I think the beauty comes from people contributing with the skills that they have. Somebody might be really good at kitchen and they can bake pastries for an event. And you might be the person who's really good at building a website or building some kind of an app to help do the stuff that the community does. And I found that it's really beneficial because quite often those communities don't really need the app or the website or something, and they don't have money to buy it. So everything that you is a bonus. So you have a lot of flexibility. This is how I learned to code in the early 2000s. I was part of a sports community, and I started building websites and statistics, kind of analytics tools, and tools to keep track of tournaments and scores. And I just kept building and building and building. Basically just stuff that I wanted to do and that I felt I was capable of doing. One example that I've also built, I'm a big fan of Pokemon TCG, the card game, and I'm part of a global community. And during the pandemic, one member of the community came up with this custom playing format, custom rule set. So I built a really simple looking black on white website with a single form where you can paste your deck list and it will tell you if it's legal within that rule set. And if it's not, it will tell which cards are not accepted. And I just built this on one Saturday evening. I posted it on Discord and I've been keeping updates coming for the past like 3 years, every couple of months. I have no idea how many people use it. I also don't really care. I built it for myself, and if somebody benefits from it in the community, great. Based on the emojis that people post when I share an update, I think there's more than me than using it. But for a portfolio project, it doesn't matter if nobody else uses it. The other thing I mentioned, I've been a member of the table hockey sport since I spent 15 years building websites and statistics tools and tournament organizing tools without anybody asking me to do it. And I just started doing stuff and I heard people talk about, oh, it would be cool to have something like this, and then the next week I would have that built for them. Every individual thing was a really small thing, and it maybe brought happiness to like 4 people. But it was good because I was able to practice, I was able to gain skills, and I was able to show that, hey, I've also built this kind of thing. If I'm applying to a position that would use that specific stack, for example. So the other option is to build something for a community that you're part of. Help other people. Don't build stuff for companies for free. in terms of coming up with ideas is just take something that somebody else did and try to replicate part of it. So you don't have to kind of replicate an entire big app or service, but take a small part. Don't look at the code. Don't copy any of the code. Just copy what it looks like, what it does, and then try to implement the same. And be very clear when you communicate that this is not your idea. This is not like a competing product. You're not doing this to copy Twitter or Meta or something like that. It's just that you want to show somebody what you can do with code by replicating something that somebody else has done. And a great example of this comes from Matt Rothenberg's prototyping playbook, where he teaches people how to build stuff with Vue.js. But in that, he's copied this kind of Instagram UX, the filter UX on a website. And the only thing that it does is that when you upload a photo, you can choose different filters, and then, it could use CSS or some image manipulation to apply that filter on the picture. And I think this is really great if you just don't have any ideas, but you want to show somebody that, hey, I can build the technical side. I'm just not the idea guy. I'm not the one who has ideas for what kind of web stuff to do, but I can do it. I don't have any examples of my own because I've always been busy with other projects. But this is absolutely valid way to both practice writing code and to use as a portfolio project. And then the fourth option is the most difficult one, but the one that can have the biggest impact, which is contributing to open source. I know that here at Hive, you're mostly encouraged to write everything from scratch yourself, but in the real life, and probably in some of your projects as well, you end up using other libraries built by other people in the open source world. And if you feel confident and kind of competent, pick a project that you like, something that you use. Check their issues for something that's good for a beginner. A lot of projects have this kind of like good first issue type of labels, where the idea is that you can pick those up. They're not technically that difficult usually to solve and to code, but nobody just has time to do them. And then you can get in touch with the maintainers, the community, ask for help, and stuff like that. And doing open source is really great because in addition to building something, it builds new networks with other people in the industry. Yes, can you pick the microphone?
I'm not familiar with open source at all, so can you give some examples of open source and what it is and how to find open source?
Absolutely, that's a great question. So basically the idea of open source development is that people write code and then they put it out in the internet with a license that lets anybody else make changes, publish their changes, and basically do whatever you want with that piece of code. So for example, if you've ever used like React or AngularJS or Vue.js or Django, Flask, even like Python itself, I don't know any C libraries, sorry, but there's a lot of those kind of libraries that you may have heard about. All of those are open source. they write some code, and then they kind of send the code back as a pull request to that project. And if it's a good thing, or kind of the maintainer accepts it, then it gets merged in, and everybody who's using that project will benefit from the small improvements that you made. Usually this is the one that's kind of the most difficult one for people at the beginning of their journey, because quite often there's kind of, you need a little bit more technical skills. But since I know that there's a wide variety of people here with different skill levels, different backgrounds, I wanted to highlight open source as one of the options. Let's recap this part. So, build something that you need or use, preferably every day, every week, something like that. Make your own to-do app, make your own grocery list thing, make your own command line tool, whatever it is. Build something for the community that you're part of. Contribute with what you can do to help other people in your group. Replicate something that exists for the pure reason of making a portfolio project. Take a small part of an existing app and make that happen. That's basically a lot what you've been doing with re-implementing C standard library from scratch. That's the kind of idea, but you can then take it to a much larger idea. And then the last option is to contribute to open source. Not the last option, the fourth option. This is not an exhaustive list. These are just the things that have come to my mind. Do you have more questions?
So if in open source projects, is it usually limited to like one language, or can it be like, let's say they're coding in Python or whatever, can I contribute in C?
So usually a single project is in single language quite often. But for example, there are projects that could have what we call SDKs, which are these kind of helper libraries that they might have one for Python, one for JavaScript, one for C, one for PHP. And then you would be able to contribute in that language. But usually if you look at the tools that you use yourself in your projects, they are quite often written in the language that you already know. I always recommend to look into some of the tools that you use yourself, because picking up a random project and trying to figure out how it works and what it does and how to implement things in it, it's really difficult. Can be done, but not the kind of smoothest experience. Does anyone have any other questions at this point? All right. Now you've built something. You have some kind of project, whether it's done or not. Software these days is never done. But just having code that runs and does something is not really that helpful in kind of portfolio sense. If you send them a job application and you just send them like a bunch of code, the likelihood that anybody will even read it is really low. And if they try to read it, them understanding it is even lower. So we need to do something on top of just writing the code to benefit from it. And this is my kind of, this is the part that I love to spend my life in kind of doing stuff like this, talking and writing and things like that. So the first part of that is documenting your project. So this is a not very flattering screenshot of one of my old projects that I'm using for the sake of example. This is what most of the GitHub repositories look like when people apply for jobs. They send somebody who's making decisions who to interview, something like this. And the truth is that it's very, very unlikely that anybody's gonna click anything on this page. This is not a really good, this is not even good, this is not enough. No matter how cool your app is, no matter how clean your code is, if somebody sends this, it's just ignored. like, I don't remember how to do anything with this. How do I even run it? So the first step, and this is something you can do when you start the project, is to create a README. So if you have a file called readme.md in your GitHub project, it will automatically create this front page for the project. And this is the current README of my app 235. And I talk a little, I have this really nice logo. Like you can see, you don't need to be a graphic designer. Your logo doesn't need to look good. And then I just talk about what it is, where it came from. It doesn't update often, so I've written that like, you can still use it, even though you don't see new commits. And then I talk about how to use it, how do you install it, how do you run it. And if you receive this instead of the previous one, you immediately have something that you can latch your interest on. Oh, they built this looks really interesting. Let's see what they did. What does this app do? If you build something that lives on the web, like a web app or website, add a link to a demo that is hosted somewhere. That's really helpful, so somebody can actually like click and see how it actually looks, what it does, how it works. And this also gives them a starting point when they want to start looking into the code. They're like, okay, I run it with this command. It's probably in the, I can see on, I don't have the code here, but I can see that, okay, it's a Rust project. It starts from this, then it goes to this file, and I can start reading and understanding. Because like naming stuff is really difficult. I think you've probably all encountered that during your studies, that like coming up with good function and variable names is really hard. So if you just read the code without any context, it's even more difficult to figure out what the functions do, no matter how hard you try to make them good. But if you have context, that this is an app that prints hockey results on this format, when it says print games in the name of a function, you already know kind of what it does. And then you can look how it does it. But if I would see just random Rust file that has a function print games, I would really have to read carefully and probably still wouldn't kind of catch what it actually does. And then the kind of next step that you can do is you can build a landing page, which is a website instead of a GitHub README. And this is mostly just the same stuff that I have on my README. But this is a really great way that you can add screenshots. You can show how it works. If it's a library that other people are using, like this one, you can show them how to integrate it into their project and what kind of configuration they need. And all of these make even the tiniest bits of software, even the smallest projects, look interesting, tell a story. And it's just human psychology that once you read something like this, it's much easier to get interested. Even if you have good intentions as a recruiter to really dig down what your level of coding is. And doing these landing pages has never been easier because you can do them with GitHub pages. I'm not gonna teach you how to do it. They have good documentation. But the idea is that you can put some in HTML into your project, like a docs folder, and then you tell in GitHub, use this folder to build a website. And then you get your username.github.io/the project name. And then you get this kind of website for free. You don't need to buy any domains. You don't need to think about kind of where to deploy, how to put things online. GitHub does all of that for free. And you can do it for every project that you do. All right. So then we get to the best part of this talk, which is storytelling. Imagine that this is the library of everything you do and everything you are. In this case, it's like every book is a job experience or a project that you built or a piece of code that you wrote. And then the person comes libraries is the recruiter or the interviewer. And you're like, oh, this is my stuff. Go ahead, look around and tell me what you like. And they might pick up the best book in the library. They might also just pick the first book because they're not bothered to walk around. Or they might find some scrap paper that somebody else left in the corner. And then they're gonna assess your skills based on that. So everything that you've done is your library, and you need to become the librarian, the curator of that collection. And you need to tell those people what are the best books in your collection, what are the best projects, your best experience. And you need to tell them, look at this. Don't worry about the other stuff. Like, this is what you need to look at. You don't want to give that power to somebody else to randomly choose a project and make assessments based on that. And this is especially important for software developers because the GitHub, it often acts both as a portfolio, but it's also our day-to-day tool. Not all of my GitHub repositories are polished and beautiful. A lot of the code doesn't even run. But it's a tool for me to keep track of things, so I just throw everything into GitHub. And then when I tell people about what I've done and what my skills are, I'm gonna be like, here's this tab that gives you the NHL results. You can see the code here. And then I've built this Pokemon tool. And then these other Pokemon tools that I've built. And oh, by the way, we had this team event at work one day during the pandemic, and we needed something fun to do. So here's a project that I built where you can play online games with your team in a 30-minute session. And I'm not gonna show them the 133 other repositories on my GitHub. If they want to go further, it's all there. But they're not. Like, if I give them 3 projects, it's likely they're only gonna look at one of them. But the idea is that you are the one who needs to be in charge of the story that you tell. We often think of like looking for jobs and being in job interviews as something where the other party has the power, the person hiring you, asking you the questions. But they only have part of that power because you are the one who decides what you're gonna show to them. And you always want to show your best. Or your most interesting. Or the most kind of wacky thing that you did. I was gonna say a couple of years ago, but then I counted, it was 11 years ago. I was a student, and I saw a job opening in New York for a company called Code Academy. They were looking for a developer. And they were looking for somebody who was in North America, graduating. And I was like a second-year student in Finland, so it's like almost the same. So I put a lot of effort into building this kind of special website, job application for them. I spent weeks and weeks on it. And it was really cool. It wasn't technically that significant or any kind of magnificent. But I did get an interview. And they told me that, like, yeah, it's likely that we're not gonna hire you. But we just had to see who this person is. Like everybody else sends their PDF, CVs and stuff. if you have a special folder with your repository, with your username, and you put a readme.md file in, that will be the front page of your profile. And I think regardless of if you're ever gonna follow any other advice on this talk, I think everybody who has a GitHub profile should write a readme. Even if it's just, hey, I'm my name. This is what I like to do. In my readme, because I've been doing a lot of stuff for a long time, I have a couple of sections. I have this kind of generic intro that links to a bunch of stuff that I've done which are professionally relevant. I have my best written work, so I don't do software development as a job, but I do technical writing and community building and stuff like that. So for me, I have my best work when it comes to writing. I have like 400 blog posts in my blog, but I'm not gonna send them just to that page and be like, just pick randomly. I want to show the best book in my collection. I also have a section of my best talks and my software projects. And I've only picked a couple on each section so that they have a little bit of option based on what they're interested in. But they're not kind of just thrown into a library of 10,000 books and be like, pick one. You are the person in charge of your own story. And this is the kind of easiest, smallest thing you can do to start telling that story. And I really like this analogy of a lens. So kind of everything blurred outside in the horizon is the things you've done. It's the library. But I can guarantee that everybody in the audience, when I showed this slide, you looked at that point. You didn't start looking here or there. You looked at the focus point that I decided to show you. And that's how it works with portfolios, job and everything. You need to be the one who tells them what they should be looking at. And your CV, your resume, your cover letter, your job application, all of that is about storytelling. It's about you telling and presenting yourself and your skills and your experience in the best possible light to anybody looking. And then let's talk a little bit about what you can do on top of that. I think once you have the code that you wrote and you have the documentation, some kind of a readme, that's the kind of minimum level. That's good. That's how you beat 90% of the people you compete against, especially in the kind of internship first job market. But if you want to go an extra mile, I saw this talk last week by Carlton Gibson. He was talking to participants of this project Django Node Space, which is an open source mentoring project. I'll share the slides with Salla so she can share them with you and you can get the link. He talks about maximizing the juice. It's a really great talk about contributing to open source, and it has a bunch of good stuff for you as well about what I'm gonna tell. But I highly recommend looking at the talk. So once you've built something, some kind of a side project, portfolio project, put it on your CV. Write blog post about it. Talk about it. Put it on social media. Let people know what you've built. So we once again come back to this project that I built, and I could have just kept it to myself, writing some code. But I decided to start writing this Learning Rust blog series. Once a month, I would gather what I had learned that month about this new programming language for me, and I would write, okay, this is what I did. I learned about this topic. That blog series is not to teach you how to write Rust. It was to document what I had been learning. And then I had the GitHub repository and the README. And I had the blog series. And then I was invited to write a couple of other blog posts on my employer's blog on one German publication about doing side projects and finding jobs. be like, hey, that's easy. Here's the app that I built. You can look at the code. You can see what I've learned about Rust. You can check out this talk. And then we can have a deeper discussion because now I gave them the tools to assess if I did a good job. And in that talk that I mentioned, Gordon Gibson puts it really well. That everything that you do, everything that you build, it starts adding up. And if you keep some kind of public log about it, it could be a blog, it could be social media, it could be your CV. When you make it visible, you can use it. I go to the extreme with this, and I write about all my projects. I have a lot of blog posts about things that I do and I learn. And I've gotten quite a lot of kind of response to them. People get in touch with me and they want to kind of invite me to speak in events or offer jobs because they saw that I've been active and I've been doing stuff, and companies tend to like people like that. Even though I'm not the greatest developer. Some of you already beat me in writing good code. The rest of you will beat me soon. I'm not a great developer, but because I share about what I do and I give quite an honest kind of view of my skills, people tend to get interested. And if you don't want to start a blog, if it feels too much, something I discovered recently is a concept called public notes. So I saw this talk about one guy who started writing public notes on their GitHub. And the way it works is that you start an empty repository called public notes. And then every time you start learning something, you start researching something, you start implementing a new feature or fixing a bug, you make a new issue. And then you just write these kind of chat type comments. That like, okay, now I'm learning Bio3. I'm writing down the commands that I use to set things up. If I run into an error, I write it down and publish it here. And these can become like, some of them are 10 comments long and they take a day. Some of them might be 1,000 comments long and they might take like a couple of years. But when you keep this kind of public notes and public documentation of what you do and what you learn, it's super invaluable for you because you can go back to them when you next need to do something similar. But also if somebody else Googles, for example, an error, they might end up in your public notes and they might find help because you figured out how to do it. Or other people might contribute and comment on these things. So I think this is the kind of easiest way to get started if you feel like a blog is too much. Alright, the last section. And this is significantly shorter than the other two, because like I said, I don't really like about giving this advice, because if I tell you to do X, and then you do X, and then you get feedback from the recruiter that like, no, I think that the opposite of X should be done, then you're calling me and being like, Juhis, why did you give me bad advice? But I'm gonna give you a couple of pieces of advice with the disclaimer that it might not work every time. First thing that I think is universally true is that the only job of your job application and the CV that you send to somebody is to get you an interview. After that, it doesn't matter. If it doesn't get you an interview, it didn't do its job. If it got you an interview, that's when you get to show people what you are about and what you can do. So you can be wild with it. You can go creative. There's great stories where people have made like custom Legos when they applied to Lego, or somebody sent like a box of donuts with their CV written on the toppings to a company office, because that gets their attention, and then they're like, I need to see who this person is. I applied to Slack a decade ago, and my job application was a replica of Slack in the web, so when they opened my application, they saw the Slack UI, and then messages started pop up. It's like, hey, I'm Juhis, I'm applying to this position. And then on this channel you can find my job history, on this channel you can find my this and that. And when I applied to Spotify, I made a website that looked like the Spotify app with a live feed of my listening, and the different playlists were the different parts of my CV, basically. I've always taken positive and non-misleading way. If I apply for a developer job to a product company and I can show them that I understand what they build and I have the skills to build it, I think that gives you so much headspace. I also applied to Twilio, which is this SMS gateway, so you can send text messages programmatically. And I made my CV in that system. So I gave them a phone number, and I was like, send a message here. And when they sent the message to that text, the phone number, it would reply with my CV. It's limitless what you can do with imagination. And this is the phrase that I used a lot when I was beginning my career. I was like, hey, I know I don't have job experience, or I don't have a lot of job experience, but I've built something, and maybe we could talk about that. I put it forward. I was the driver of the story, that hey, I have something I can use to showcase to you that even though I don't have experience, I'm able to build stuff. And it had really good results. But that's just half of the puzzle. You've already seen this, you know what it means. But the second half is, what if they say yes? And they're like, okay, let's talk about your project. What now? Talk about what did you build? I've talked about so many of my projects. Oh, I have this thing. I built it because X, Y, and Z. And this is how it works. And this is what it does. Talk about the technology choices. Why did you choose C? Why did you choose Rust? Why did you choose Django with React? Be honest with this one. Don't try to answer something that sounds impressive. If the reason is that that's the only language you know, that's a good reason. If the reason is you wanted to learn a new language, that's a great reason. If the reason is that I saw in your job job ad that you work with Django and React, so I wanted to build something with that technology. Great answer. What the reason is doesn't matter, but being able to talk about it and being able to justify it, whatever it is a good meta skill. Tell them what did you learn. Because learning is the most important skill as a software developer. If you cannot learn new things, you're gonna go out of fashion real fast in this industry. A lot of people, when they build a project, a hobby project, by the time they get to the end, they're a little bit ashamed of the code that they started with. That happens to me every time. That's because you're learning something new along the way. So don't be ashamed of it. Talk about it. You don't have to fix it in the code. You can talk about it. Hey, during this time I learned about this, and now I would do that part differently. Being able to kind of understand and put into words and conceptualize what you have learned is such an incredible skill. And then you can talk about what would you do differently, whether it's the tech, whether it's design choices. These are the type of things that if I have a discussion with you and you're able to have a good discussion based on these four things, even without looking at your code, I can get a really, really good understanding of what level you are as a developer. Because typing those characters is one thing. Understanding what you're doing, understanding what you're learning, understanding how you can make something better, justifying your choices. That tells to me that you understand what you're doing, and you can learn all the other stuff while working. But it's so much more difficult to learn these kind of meta skills than it is to learn about programming, the kind of typing of the code. And then this kind of thing has become more popular these days, so I wanted to add it here just to kind of let you know that it's a thing. Amazon started doing this kind of behavioral questions during their job interviews. And because everybody thinks they're like Amazon, they started doing the same. And they usually look like this or sound like this. Hey, tell us about the time that you used, C to solve a problem. time that you had a conflict with a colleague, how did you solve that? What did you do? Or like, tell us about the time that you didn't hit the deadline and it went past. How did you react? What did you do? How did you solve that? One thing that you can do is that you have that hobby project that you've been building. You can think them through that. If you build something together with somebody, talk about that teamwork experience. If you solve the technical problem or you run into a bug and they ask about, tell us about the case when you had a technical problem, how did you solve it? Think about the project that you did. Amazon has also the kind of solution to their questions, which is called the STAR model. I wouldn't learn this kind of by heart or anything, but just to give you an idea, this is one way to approach it. So you explain the situation. They ask, tell us about the time that you had a bug in your code and how did you solve it? And then you would go, oh, I was building this app 235. And then at one point we noticed that it wasn't running correctly on Windows. That's the situation. What was the task that I worked on? Oh, then I started looking into how do we make this piece of code run on Windows? And what action did you take? Well, I talked with the person who submitted the bug, and we figured something out that worked. But then I asked around in the Rust community of like, why is it doing like this? I don't think it should be. I got some feedback, and I was able to actually find the root cause. And then the results, I was able to figure out the bug. I made a fix, I asked the person who reported it to make a fix. We merged it in, and now it works both on Mac and Windows. So that's the kind of framework that you can kind of think about these questions as. I always find it a little bit unnerving when a company kind of gamifies job interview and then they give you material to kind of practice to their kind of imagined problems. But they do, and a lot of people copy Amazon. So I just wanted to give you a heads up that these kind of things are becoming more and more common, unfortunately. The good thing for you is twofold. I have published most of this same talk in a different format on my blog. There's a blog post called Guide to Landing Your First Dev Job. This has also been recorded, and if technology worked well, you're able to revisit it and take another look if there was something especially interesting. I wish you all a good luck with studies and projects and finding jobs. If you want to get in touch with me, you can do it via email, LinkedIn, Mastodon, any platform you find me on. Like I said, I write a blog. Feel free to read that. And I apparently don't have the last slide. That was going to have an advertisement. So I run a monthly free newsletter about debugging. So what to do when the computer says no. And every month on the 17th, I publish ideas, tips, tricks, technologies, tools. You can find it through my website since I don't have it on these slides. It's written for people like you. You can read, you can subscribe to it to your email, an RSS reader, or just read on the web. I don't need your emails. I don't do anything with them. I just want to share what I've learned over the past 2 decades about writing better code and figuring out when the computer says no. But that's all for the monologue. I'm happy to take any questions, or if you want to talk in kind of one-on-one, I'm going to be sticking around. Thanks to Salla for inviting me, or kind of, I think I invited myself here. But yeah, it's always a super nice to visit Hive. I think you have made a great decision to be at Hive and be here today. So thank you.
Questions, Nico?
Hey, thank you. That was really insightful and really great to have like some tools to start building a good portfolio. I have a question regarding like projects in your portfolio. How in depth and how easy do you make it to see what you have built? In the sense of, for example, I made like a full stack web app, and do I make a video of how people can use it? Do I make pictures with descriptions, or is it enough to have like a live version? Or what would your advice be on that?
You basically answered it yourself. All of those options are okay. Like, if your app is visual, take screenshots, do little screen recordings and turn them into GIFs and put them on your README. If it's a web app, host it somewhere, host like a demo version, put some data, some kind of dummy data in, just so that people can click around. All of those are really good options. Anything, like you said, anything that makes it easy for the other person to get a grasp of what you're doing.
Thank you.
Hello. Thank you also for the speech. Really nice like items to work in or give a thought. I was interested in the public notes like repository you have explained. I kind of already like to write stuff. I take notes while I work to remember to myself, but I don't publish anywhere. It's like how I work. So do you think this is a better idea than having like a blog, personal blog? Because it seems like the blogs are less and less used. What's your opinion on that?
I don't think one is better than the other. I think they work in a kind of different situations, I found. What I like about public notes is that it's the kind of raw, unfiltered, every mistake is visible type of thing. I have a lower threshold of like, oh, I made a mistake here because I misunderstood the docs, and I write it down. And when I write a blog post about a project, usually I hide those things, not because I want to hide my mistakes, but because it's better for the cohesion of a blog post. That it's kind of a little bit more polished, a little bit more kind of well-rounded. So I think having both is great. I do disagree with the idea that blogs are dying or not that useful anymore. It is true that less people have been blogging lately because of social media. But the thing with social media is that it's all really short-lived. I could talk for 2 hours about why you should have a blog. I also have a couple of blog posts about that. But I think that the thing with both the public notes and the blog post is that even though they are public, that you put out there, it doesn't matter if anybody ends up reading them kind of in the net by themselves. Looking at readership numbers is not in any way relevant when you write kind of like a technical blog. Because the thing that you can do with these things, with blog posts, with public notes, is that when I have a discussion with somebody, I can be like, hey, I have these references. I've written about this. Like you asked me about blogging, and I can be like, I have 3 blog posts about that. I can send you them to your way. Or a friend was asking or kind of suggesting that maybe he should watch the 2005 Hitman movie. And I was like, I have a blog post about why it's a bad movie. And I have this tendency that if I'm asked the same thing, like at least 3 times, instead of answering kind of separately anymore, I write that thing in a blog post. So it's easier to reference later. But yeah, it's like, I like this idea of like building a body of work. At the beginning, you have 1, 2 blog posts and they don't seem to matter. But right now I have like 400 and people keep linking to them and they come up in discussions and I can send them to. A year ago I had a bunch of job interviews when I came back to Finland. And like everybody who was interviewing me was like, oh yeah, our people read your blog. And we attend your events and we've seen your talks and we subscribe to your newsletter. And I can tell you at that point, it's quite easy to kind of convince them to hire me because they've already made the decision to read my stuff and follow my stuff and they think that it's good. But also it's like if somebody, like I mentioned, if somebody asked me about Rust, I can be like, yeah, I have this series of blog posts. There's 10 blog posts and a couple of talks. And it's really helpful even if nobody finds them online
And a side question about human psychology, like imagine we start writing publicly, but of course we are like early in the career, we feel like we don't know enough. I understand the concept that this is like kind of the same idea of working with the garage open, like the door open, so everybody can see how you learn, but how you overcome, like for example, if I want to share my blog post, which is crap now, and I know it, in LinkedIn, for example, to showcase, okay, I'm learning C, I have learned about linked list, like you feel like kind of, okay, nobody's gonna be interested on this, or how you overcome this psychological like sabotage to
That's
yourself.
a really good question. I kind of intentionally didn't mention it during the talk, that doing this stuff is hella scary. Like learning in public, being in public, building in public is super scary. I do this all the time, and every time I'm about to publish a blog post, I'm like, maybe I shouldn't. Am I good enough? Every time I do a talk, 30 minutes before the talk, I'm like, who did I cheat to get here? Like I'm not good enough to talk about this or write about this. The only thing that has helped me is kind of once you just start doing it, you just hit that publish. When I publish a blog post and I share it online, I usually close my browser and Slack for like a couple of hours because like I'm afraid that somebody will say something. They don't. Like 99% of the time, it's positive. Sometimes people misunderstand what you write, and then you have a thread on Reddit and Hacker News, and everybody's just piling on you, and that's the unfortunate part. But the thing that I would say that could help is try to change the way you see about blog posts. That it's not that you're an authority who's teaching somebody something. Think of it as you are sharing what you've learned. You're documenting it for yourself or somebody else in your situation. Reading about experiences of people at the same level than you can be so much more understandable and easier than reading a blog post by somebody who has done something for 20 years, because they don't remember anymore what it's like to be a new learner. They skip over a lot of the important stuff because they've done it so much. And then when I started blogging like a decade ago, I always had this thing that like, well, somebody else has already written about this. But the thing with internet is that there's a lot of space to put stuff in. You can have more than one post about a topic online. And the thing is that even if somebody did write about the exact same topic, they had a different experience than you. And their post likely reaches different people than yours. So you're adding to that discussion, you're adding to that ever-growing, accumulative kind of base of knowledge that we have in the internet. And I think it's super valuable when you, as a beginner, write about the good and the bad and the struggles and the wins that you get while you're learning. Because you're not alone. Think about it in a way that if you are struggling with something and you read a blog post by somebody in the same situation as you, and you see that, hey, I'm not alone, and they figured it out and they learned from it and they went through the struggles, it can give you a lot of positive energy and a lot of hope. And by writing yourself, you can do that to others. I think nobody's too inexperienced to write blog posts or give talks in events.
Thank you.
I'm curious, do you recommend leak codes projects at all?
I don't really have a strong opinion. I think they can be really good as a tool of practice. I wouldn't put any or very little kind of effort or kind of thinking about your like lead rank or something like how do you perform in these kind of things. But they can be really good, bite-sized practice things. The thing with them is often that the code you end up writing in those things is usually really bad code compared to kind of real life stuff. Because quite often there's like, you do the small thing and you need to be optimized and everything, and then, people have one letter variable names and they kind of, because you don't ever need to run it again. You can learn some bad habits. But as long as you know that, as long as you're like, hey, I'm applying my skills to this thing, I think they can be great. One thing that I love to do, which is similar, is Advent of Code, which happens every December. Every day you get a couple of puzzles, and then you write your code to solve those puzzles. And I love them because of the community. And I think with lead code, there's probably similar kind of community where it's like you write something and then you can discuss with other people. You can see how other people solve those problems. And I think that's highly valuable. So it can be good practice, but like don't obsess over your like lead code ranking or something like that. There's a couple of American companies that might care about those, but like I've never heard of a case like in Finland that you go to a job interview and you tell that your like lead score is 192. I don't know the scale, and they would be like, yes, we will hire you. Like if you've done a lot of that kind of stuff, it's a good indication that you're learning and you're practicing. So if you take it in the right context, they can be really good at kind of practicing stuff. But I wouldn't also like if you need to make a decision between using your time for lead code or building some kind of more rounded out project of your own, I would do the project because that's more real life and that can have a lot more kind of discussions. But it's not a bad thing to do or a bad place. You can learn a lot there.
And you said earlier in the talk that as a beginner, it's kind of hard to gauge how much you know and what you can do. Do you have any advice on it from where you're standing to a beginner to like where can I go to kind of really assess my skills and assess what I really know?
Well, there's two things. I think it's always difficult. I still don't know how good I am at like writing Python. But one thing where you can kind of get some kind of measurement is applying for jobs. And like if you get those jobs, that at least tells you that you are good enough. If you don't get the job, it doesn't mean that you're not good enough because there can be plenty of reasons. But then the other thing, the way I try to overcome or go around that is that I post everything publicly. I let other people to make that decision so that I don't have to. When I'm interviewing for like a dev position, I don't really know how I measure with other people. But like, here's my best project and here's what I've written about it. So like, it's your job now to figure out if I'm good enough. Because like, it's so complex space. Like writing, like building software. There's the kind of writing code thing. There's like writing good code in terms of like well-architected, well-tested, well-documented stuff. Then there's the design of building things. There's the social side in the real life where you talk to users and you actually need to build something for other people. So then when you ask somebody how good you are at coding, it's kind of like, what part of coding? Like, you could be really good at like writing Python or C, but if you're an asshole, you're not really good at writing code in a team. So it's like, how do you then like compare between two people? But it is something that I've been kind of struggling or wondering a lot during my life, and I still do. It would be nice to have some kind of like a certificate that like, Juhis, you are now good programmer. But you'll never get that. But then there's the kind of question of being good enough, which often means that if somebody's willing to pay you money, then you're good enough as a software developer, and you can keep that job. So yeah, it's a difficult one. I don't have a real answer to that. But the way I tackle it, and the way I tackle my kind of imposter syndrome, is that I build in public. Everything I do, I take this like really extreme approach, where it's like everything I do, every software project I ever write on my own time, it's on GitHub. I talk about in meetups and conferences, and I write blog posts, and I'm like brutally honest about this is the best I can do right now, and this is what I'm learning. And yeah, it has helped a lot with the imposter syndrome. Not that it goes away, but at least I can be like, have enough to give you so that you can be the judge, so I don't have to be. Anybody else? Good catch.
Thank you. I had a question about, like, we had a talk before, like a couple of months ago, about optimizing portfolios for job applications. And what are your ideas or thoughts on having a standard, non-company optimized, just a standard portfolio PDF, sending those in, and just having them be good?
Yeah, my personal approach is that I don't do that. Every position that I apply, I make a custom CV and custom cover letter, maybe sometimes a custom project. But the downside of that is that it takes a lot of time. And sometimes if you just need to apply to a big number of things, sure. For me, it's always been that, like, I always feel that I'm usually almost never going to be the best technical candidate when I apply for a technical job. That's not what I am. So I've always thought that I need to get their attention some other way than just comparing who has the most years of experience in writing code. But, like I said, every advice, somebody thinks the opposite. And it's like if you, probably at some point, if you just like, let's say you have 5 years of experience of being software developer in one company and 5 years in the other, you probably don't need to do a lot of customization at that point to get the third one. Like you've done, I've been writing code for 10 years. Can I do it for you? But then I'm the type of person who's doing like 100 projects a year, different sorts of things, from writing to speaking to building side projects to, doing documentation and contributing to open source, and it's all kind of a mess. So then I need to do a lot more of that storytelling to kind of convince them that, like, yeah, I may not have done exactly what you're looking for, and for like 10 years, but like I'm pretty good at doing stuff. And like, let's just have a discussion about which of my experiences I think that would be the best for what you are doing. So like if I would apply for a Rust position, I would focus much more on the Rust projects that I've done and being part of the Rust community. And if I apply for a Python consulting project or something like that, I probably wouldn't talk about those things. I would bring up my talks in PyCon conferences and running a Python meetup in Turku and this blog post that I write about Python and these software projects that I've done in Python. So I think in my case, because I have so many things, I have things that I can pick that are unique. So it's like kind of like, if we go back to my favorite picture of the library, not everybody who walks into this library are gonna be happy with the same book. Somebody likes crime and somebody likes fantasy and somebody likes cooking books. And I think it's a little bit similar when you apply for jobs. Some companies need some skills more than some other. So I think that there's always benefit to kind of customizing at least a little bit. At least kind of read through your CV and your application to make sure that your focus points are the ones that are specific to that company. You can use a template for that. You can build, like, you can put all your stuff in a JSON file, and then you can write the thing with C, where you can just select what you want, and it will print you a nice PDF. That can be a side project for somebody. But it's like, I don't imagine things from the scratch. I just have a lot of Lego pieces, and then I put them together in different order based on the company. Hopefully that was an answer to something.
Yes, thank you.
If there's no more right now, I can close the mic and we can hang out. And if somebody didn't want to ask a question in public, feel free to come chat with me about this or anything else. Thank you.
So unpleasant of you. Oh my god.